I'm Sherry Duffy with the Commission on the Status of Women. I'm so glad you're here. And Dr. Gardner, thank you for being with us. Dr. Gardner is coming in to apply for the Executive Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Louisville. Go Cards! Kevin is a Vice Provost for Research, and he's going to learn how to throw his L's up real well. He's State Director for New Hampshire EBSCOR. He's a professor in civil and environmental engineering at the University of New Hampshire. So he's well versed in the classroom as well as in the research office. He's been 9 years Director of Strategic Innovations as Vice Provost for Research at the University of New Hampshire. Kevin, welcome to our beautiful University of Louisville.
Thank you very much, Sherry. I appreciate that. Nice introduction. Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me back. I'm going to talk about 3 different things this morning and probably take 15 or 20 minutes and then open it up for questions from the audience or from the online audience. So briefly, I'm going to talk about who I am, what drives me, why I'm interested in the University of Louisville, and then 4 opportunities I see for the university that have, and I'll talk to you about why I think I'm a good fit for leading change in those 4 areas. So the first thing I want people to know is that I'm guided by my values. So my values are integrity, honesty, and transparency. So it doesn't always make for easy conversations, but those are what drive me. I was asked last week to head a new nationwide initiative for the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities on transparency and research. So myself and Mark McClellan, who's VPR at University of North Texas, will be leading that effort. I serve on another APLU, AAU task force around accelerating public access to research data. So active researchers know that sharing data and what data needs to be shared and how to share it and how to archive it and how long it should be done for and what are the implications for protected data and things like that is a significant issue. So we are working on that group and sharing those results to influence the policies that the federal government puts in place for public research data and sharing public research data. And then the last one I'll mention is my work for APLU on public impact focused research. So that's research with an explicit focus on public impact, which can be broad. It could be public impact through industry engagement, through new products. It can be public impact through economic development type mechanisms. So broadly speaking. Okay, so one thing, I'm guided by those values of integrity, honesty, and transparency. Second thing is, what really drives me is making a positive impact in the world. I'm a team player. I want to be on a team that's committed to making a positive impact. Positive impact in Metro Louisville, positive impact in Kentucky, positive impact in the world. So that's really important. I really believe in the social mission of a public university like Louisville, and that's really important for me. I really see our mission as creation of knowledge and dissemination of that knowledge. 2 really simple, kind of simplistic ways of thinking about a university, creating that knowledge, getting that knowledge out into the world. If that knowledge doesn't get out into the world, whether it may because it's not relevant or because we're not doing a good job, then we're not fulfilling our mission. So then the third thing is how I work. I work by providing, so I'm motivated by that drive. I work by developing, fostering strong, diverse teams. It takes teams with lots of different types of expertise to be effective. Everybody knows that diverse teams solve problems much better. It's really important for a really large, diverse institution to have diverse teams that function effectively. So that's my background is in doing that, both in the research office at UNH and my own scholarship. I was just mentioning before we started here that my scholarship is rooted in transdisciplinary research. So I have a project that's just finishing up right now that has colleagues from rhetoric and communication sciences and economics, engineering, ecology, earth science, biology, fisheries, really broad representation, all around solving a really important problem. It's kind of around dams and rivers and the benefits that we get from dams and rivers, but also the ecological impacts that those have. So really complex decision making that's happening in society broadly that we hopefully can inform through science. I also have a lot of interest and background in grand challenges, and I know that's something that Louisville's talking about now. I, as part of this fellowship that I had for APLU, studied grand challenges at university campuses, how they were developed, why they were developed, whether there was evidence of their success, what some of the trade-offs are with those. So I mentioned to some folks here that I have a working paper that's available online at the UNH Scholars Repository on those grand challenges. So that's something I'm really interested in. I think it can be really important and a really important way to engage the state or the community. And it can also be, there can also be a lot of challenges with implementing those grand challenges. So it's something that is both really worth doing and worth thinking about, and also really matters to whether you, it's really important that you do it well. So why University of Louisville? I like the vision of University of Louisville being a premier metropolitan research university. That says a lot of things in there. It's an R1 institution that's rooted in its home community of Louisville. So that's an important mission that I'm fully on board with. And when I think about being an engaged university, I think about the engaging in the knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination business. So that means, and when I say that really simply as if we create the knowledge over here in the university and then we give it out to all those people that need it out there. And of course it doesn't work that way, or it shouldn't work that way. And so a little refinement of that is really what I would call knowledge co-creation of knowledge and value of that knowledge. And that means working closely with partners. So working closely with your industry partner. I know you guys are doing some of this in engineering school for sure. If you're in the social work field, the work you do is going to be a lot more relevant if you actually work with providers and so forth than if you do it kind of isolated. So that partnership piece is really important. So when I say knowledge creation and dissemination, it's really through that partnership that we understand what the value of our work is that can help guide the work that we do. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, so those are the kind of the three things I wanted to hit up front. You know, what my background is, why University of Louisville is a good fit for me. What are the opportunities? So these are things I'm going to say from the outset. I believe deeply in the co-creation of knowledge and understanding and strategy. So I've got perceptions of University of Louisville, but decidedly from an outside perspective. Right? I did my homework. I read the strategic plan. I read the diversity plan. I looked at all your numbers that are reported to NSF. Right? I did as much kind of homework as I could to understand something about University of Louisville, but it's really from the outside. And so I'm going to provide these ideas, recognizing that this is really the beginning of a dialogue, that I'm not the kind of person that's going to be like, this is where we're going, like this ship's leaving, already left the port, and we're going to go this way. Like, that's not a recipe for success at all, that if it doesn't involve everybody being on board, faculty, deans, provost, chairs, and so forth, it's not going to go anywhere. You might go fast, but you're not going to go far, as they say. Okay, so 4 kind of opportunities. So the first one is to build an entrepreneurial innovation office. I think that there's opportunity to doing that. I'm going to give you 3 kind of components of that I think are really important. So number 1, you have to be in the startup creation game if you're going to be in the innovation space. That is, nobody's signing exclusive licenses anymore for IP. Like what they're doing is they're waiting until a company gets created that has demonstrated value in the marketplace and acquiring that company. Instead of paying $100,000 for IP up front, they're going to wait till the company gets developed and pay $5 million for the company later on down the road. So if we don't have the ability to start up companies effectively, then we're going to be missing out on that entire piece of the pie. Okay, so need that startup creation capacity. Second thing is that innovation and entrepreneurship needs to be for all of the University of Louisville. That, innovation and IP protection and so forth grew up in the life sciences and serves the life sciences well. It didn't grow up in all the other disciplines that exist at a university, but there's so much value in all those other disciplines. So the way I think about innovation and entrepreneurship is getting the ideas that are inside the university out of the university and doing that in the most effective way possible. It doesn't always mean maximizing revenue from IP. It means something different. So we just, our last spin out was a nonprofit, right? And we had another nonprofit spin out, and we lose money on that. Like, that's not the maximizing revenue approach, but it's the maximizing the social good approach. And so that's a conversation between the faculty member or the inventors that the campus has and the innovation office for what is the vision around this. So in this case, we could have made a few more bucks on our Prevention Innovation Research Center and their spin out called Soteria Solutions. But instead of making a few more bucks, we're impacting tens of thousands of people in the armed forces, in academia, right, all in the federal government around sexual assault prevention. Right? Much more important, much better story to tell about the impact, and much more important from a social perspective, much higher value. UNH has a smaller research profile than Louisville by a little bit, about 146 million last year, 2018. But we don't have a medical school, so that all happens in sciences and engineering and life sciences. But we were top 5 in licensing for like top 10 for the last 5 years or something like that. Why is tiny little New Hampshire top 5 in licensing? All right, so and the main reason is that we include a focus on licensing of creative works. It's not just intellectual property that's going to pay off in some other way. We license creative works, trademarks, copyrights, and things like that. There's a lot of important material, a lot of important knowledge that happens in a university in the rest of the university that's not health sciences and engineering. That's why we're top 5. And then lastly, I'll just say that tech transfer, is a university decision. How do we want to think about this? How do we want to treat this? I was in Singapore last year studying how they do their tech transfer work, and Nanyang Technological University, which is a powerhouse, I think about $1 billion research a year, something like that, they give away all their IP. And they generate a lot of it. They work really closely with industry. And we were like, what do you mean you give away your IP? They said, that's the business's. I mean, it's a different cultural context, but they said that's the business's job. It's their job to take these ideas that we think have value and make a really successful business out of them. That's business's job. I'm not suggesting that that's the right thing for Louisville, but I'm saying that there's a choice. There's a continuum along the kind of maximizing value to giving away the IP, and what you think about the role of the university is in that. So it's not a given, and that's a dialogue that we as a university have to have, and it should be a dialogue that happens with a faculty member about their vision for their inventions and what they want to achieve out of that. So it's really about maximizing the social value of that. And then the last thing I'll say is just business engagement is the third part of that office. We need really strong partnerships with business and industry. That's a critical element to I think driving entrepreneurship at the university by faculty recognizing the value that their ideas have to industry, right? Eventually driving industry-sponsored research. So those partnerships with industry are critically important. I've got a tremendous amount of experience in doing that in New Hampshire in different ways. We really have a different dialogue in the state now than we did just 5 years ago about the value of a research university within the state of New Hampshire, which really wasn't appreciated before. So, and that really comes through the voices of the businesses that we engage with who say, we need that university. We need the workforce, we need the talent, we need the expertise of the faculty, we need their facilities. So that's been really a game changer in New Hampshire. Okay, the second opportunity is the commitment to diversity that the university has and that the research office needs to have in order to go hand in hand with that. Research office is a place to play in that, a really important role to play in that. And if we want to achieve this vision of being a premier metropolitan research university, we have to do this. And I would say to serve our students, we have to do it. To serve our democracy and our global environment, we have to do this. So what's the role of the research office in this? how can the research office include a commitment to inclusive excellence? So I have a couple ideas. So number one, you have a lot of work around these really high value experiences for undergraduates. And I think that the living learning communities and so forth, which are shown to be really effective, research experiences also are really effective for those undergraduates. And you have a goal of increasing those from 125 to 250 or something like that. And I think it should be you should add about another 0 after those two. At UNH, we have a undergraduate research conference every year that has about 1,400 students, and out of our student population of 12,000 undergraduates. So Louisville should be a lot higher than 250. And we also have to think about scholarship broadly. It's research and scholarship. So at our conference, the engineering students, for example, present their designs. That's creative work. That's original work. It can be celebrated as scholarship from those students. And in liberal arts, it might be poetry, it might be anything else, right? That's scholarship. Actually, your chief of staff, Michael Wade Smith, said in his 2010 KU inauguration speech, scholarship is everything that happens at the university, and we need to recognize scholarship in all of its different forms. It doesn't have to have a pipette in order to be research, right? It can be more broad than that. So undergrads can be much more involved in research, and it works really well at New Hampshire, and it's part of our culture there. I think that there's opportunity to guarantee every student, and this is the kind of discussion we need to have, guarantee that every student who comes here from Metro Louisville has a research experience that wants one. Like, why can't we guarantee that high value experience? Because 250 out of a population of a lot more than that is just not that many engagements, right? Not many people get that high value experience. I would also suggest that we require mentorship training for faculty, postdocs, grad students who are mentoring undergraduate students. We have just developed a new mentorship academy at the University of New Hampshire, and we actually use this applied theater group called Power Play, who are really good at training around bias in the hiring decision, which was developed through our advanced grant, on collaboration, for how to collaborate effectively, for how to have difficult conversations in the community. In New Hampshire, this was about, we had these things called free staters in New Hampshire that were people that wanted to take over the state and then dissolve the government or something like that. So they said, if they tried to get a lot of people to move to New Hampshire and then do this. Anyway, they were disrupting public meetings and things like that. So how do you have a difficult conversation in a community? And they, with their applied theater approach, are really effective at training around these types of difficult issues. One of the other things we just did at New Hampshire in its second year now is a postdoctoral scholars program. We struggled, and I've read about Louisville's struggle around hiring underrepresented faculty in a number of different disciplines. And so now we adopted this program. UNC Chapel Hill has started this program and has seen it to be effective, where we identify hires that are going to happen in department 2 years out and hire postdocs in that field that will be able to compete for those jobs in 2 years. In this case, the postdocs have their own research agenda and so forth. So we don't have the results from that yet, but we've seen that it's worked well in other places. So we're hoping that that's something that can actually change the composition of our faculty at New Hampshire. And then lastly, I'll say that this kind of goes back to the first item around entrepreneurship and innovation. We should build entrepreneurship programs that work for all students across the university. It's not a business school thing or an engineering school thing. All students should be able to be engaged in entrepreneurship. And our entrepreneurship is focused on first-generation students. UNH, we have about 30% of our students are first-gen. And they're the least likely to start a business, right? Studies show, but they're the most in debt. They're the most likely to say, I just want to get a job. So we were trying to move the needle on entrepreneurship activities, entrepreneurial activities in first-gen students. And I think there's an opportunity for doing that. In Louisville, I read your statistics about African-American students and about students that come from poverty or within a certain level of the poverty level in Kentucky or in the surrounding counties. So right, again, those are probably populations less likely to think about starting their own business out of college. So I think there's an opportunity to engage them purposefully. And it's also a really great way, really easy kind of to fundraise around this idea that we found at New Hampshire. And in fact, one of the incentives to come to entrepreneurship programming is that a donor pays off the student. It's a passport program, and students go to different things. They stamp their passport, and the person with the most stamps essentially gets their student loans paid off up to $34,000 or something like that. So it's really high incentive for engagement in this program, something that's really meaningful, particularly for those students that have debt associated with college. In New Hampshire, we have a lot of that, unfortunately. The third opportunity is to grow research. Research has been flat for the last decade. You all know this. You've lost ground with some federal agencies. Health science has been flat for the last decade. So why is that, and what can we do about that? So number one is that the office really needs a strong research development program. And I would say what we did at New Hampshire a couple years ago is to start a large center development program. So I would think about it both research development, but also large center development to really be able to move the needle. So first of all, we have to think about faculty across their life cycle. We have to think about the faculty before they step foot on campus, when they're interviewing, and we have to think about faculty that are at different stages of their career. There's one idea for a way to move the needle on is to think about who the future stars. So Kevin Walsh sitting here in the audience, he's one of the stars that you guys have at Louisville right now. So who's next? Who comes after him? And so we need to be thinking about grooming 5 more people in these spaces that we think are going to be successful in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, something like that. So how do we mentor those individuals that have the track record, that show promise, that have the drive, right? So I think we can put together a mentorship program around the kind of future stars mentorship program, because those are the people that are going to be able to bring in large dollar sums, and that's what you need to really move the needle. New Hampshire, we just pulled in a $108 million grant from NASA. That's the biggest grant we've ever gotten. And let me tell you, it takes a big team of people. It takes project management staff. If you just say, yeah, faculty, you guys should go for that $100 million grant, forget, and teach your classes and everything else, forget about it. It takes a big investment to go after those big grants. It takes project managers, project management staff. I don't know what happens here in terms of engagement in DC, but it's really important that we engage with congressional offices. We do this in New Hampshire. I've been working with mentoring one of our future stars. We got a $7 million appropriation this year out of the congressional action. So that's a really important thing to be doing, and to make sure you have a strategic engagement, not only with congressional staff, but with agencies, departments, Department of Defense, Department of Energy. That's how those things work. They work by relationships, and the university needs to be out there. That means whoever's in this position really needs to be out there forming those relationships. And then the last thing is building partnerships. It's really important to build partnerships. I talked about industry partnerships already, national lab partnerships. When those FOAs come out, those teams are already set. They were set back before that FOA was written. So that's where Louisville needs to be, and to do that, you need to build those relationships. I think you guys have some relationship with Oak Ridge. I'm not sure about other national labs. We're working right now to put on a National Lab Day at University of New Hampshire next fall. I just hosted 8 heads of national labs about a week ago up there to start pulling that day together. So wherever that space is, whether it's DOE, whether it's NASA, we need to build those relationships, bring them to campus. And then the last thing, number 4 on my opportunity list, is that the Research and Innovation Office needs to be the best in its class. That is just, and so I said it last, but it's actually job number 1. I can't go talk to deans and faculty if they're not getting the best service and they don't feel like they're getting the best service possible from the research office. It's really, really important. And so this is something I've spent a long time working on at New Hampshire. I think if Louisville is going to be a place to learn, work, and invest, I think that work piece is really important. It's really important that we have that people want to be there, that they're valued, that they're doing a great job, and that we're getting all the feedback from people that we serve. I have a servant leadership model through and through, and so for me, it's about service to faculty. If we're not graduating skilled, educated students out of this university, everybody's responsible for that. We all need to get on that and serve that need. So I'll give you an example. I told you I'm all about transparency. So one of my favorite authors is Donna Meadows. She was a professor at Dartmouth. She does systems engineering kind of work, systems modeling. So developing these complicated models about how they think the world works. And you have to always be humble enough to say, well, maybe the world doesn't work that way, or maybe somebody else has a different perspective on that. So, so that's how I like to operate the units that report to me. So we always open them up to the open air, as Donna Meadows would say, and let the sunlight shine in on what it is we're doing. So if we think this is how we're going to move the needle on research development, we're going to do this and this and this, we're going to put these people in place, we should get some other perspectives on that. So the way I would run this is to have it be completely open and have it be reviewed regularly. And we do this as part of the course of business. We review all the different parts of the units on a regular basis, not when there's a problem or we perceive to be a problem, because then it's really a punitive thing. We just do it regularly. So we just had an NCURA review for compliance. We had a bunch of people from around the country. A few people came in to review our compliance functions. We didn't have any problems with compliance. We did a lot of things great. They all got a huge pat on the back for a lot of things, and they got some ideas for how they could streamline some things also. So how do we know we're going to be best in class? Because we're going to invite everybody in to give us their perspectives about how we could do things better, and we're going to have that open, kind of transparent process. The last thing I'll mention about that is one of the projects we kicked off a few years ago, we called the customer journey. So this was the customer's a faculty member, and we thought about what are all the ways the research office touches faculty throughout their life cycle. And then we engaged faculty in a bunch of focus groups, a bunch of focus groups to get direct feedback about those different parts of the life cycle and think about how we could do things differently. And one of the things, and so we made some changes through that process. For example, we now make sure that we get faculty candidates who are coming through campus on the schedule of our Research Computing Center and Instrumentation Center when they have computing or instrumentation types of needs. And that we've found that's been really powerful for helping to sell faculty on coming to UNH. They have all these great services that are going to be offered to them. So it's really changed things substantially. That's just one example from like the earliest stage of before faculty are even hired, which when I first thought about it, I was like, do we really have a role in there? Turns out, yeah, we do have a role in that part. Okay, so those are the 4 kind of opportunities. I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have here or you folks in the universe have on the camera there.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. If you have questions in the audience, if you could move to the microphone over here to my left. And if you have questions online, if you will text them in the chat box, I'll repeat them to Dr. Gardner.
Hi, thank you for that nice discussion. Appreciate it. I want to get your ideas on a couple areas here, and I realize this kind of depends upon the structure of the overhead return, but I'd like to get your idea about your philosophy on startup packages and how they should be funded. Right now, a lot of this is done at the college level, as well as like cost share on some of the big grants like MRIs where it's mandatory.
Yep. Yeah, great question. I met with the CFO earlier today and basically asked me the same similar question. The budgeting model at University of New Hampshire is very different than here. We have a responsibility-centered management budgeting system. So each college is its own unit and kind of sinks or swims on their own a little bit. But most of the F&A goes back to the colleges there, and then 10% goes back to the PI. So I guess I would, I think it depends on the overall budgeting structure for the university to be able to answer that question accurately. I think at New Hampshire, it's really important, that 10% back to the PI is really important because there are no funds to fix your instrument. Right? There are no funds to support someone for a few months after they should have graduated, but they didn't. There just aren't those funds. So it's really important to be successfully run a major research operation. You need that money coming back because there is no place else to go and get that, essentially. With respect to startups, most of that happens in the colleges at New Hampshire. VPR's office will kick in sometimes, but what we've really done effectively is shifted the culture to shared instrumentation and shared compute facilities. And so when we invest in startup packages, we normally invest in the shared resource. And then that faculty member gets hours on the SEM or some number of CPUs and things like that to charge against. So that's a way that's enabled us to take, we have really scarce resources at New Hampshire, and we need to make those go as far as possible. And having that centralized infrastructure has been really important. And we've seen a change, and I don't know if this is the people that we're attracting, but it was always the case in the past that each faculty wanted this type of instrument in their own lab. And finally, and then it's not until you're 5 years in and your service contract has lapsed and the thing's broken and you don't have money to keep your staff member hired who has to keep your machine up all the time that you think, boy, this is not what I envisioned it would be. So we have seen a pretty big shift in people moving to appreciating those core facilities and trying to get instruments moved into that core. Right? Hey, let them maintain it. I'll pay the per service, per hour, or whatever it is, charge for that. So that is one way that has been effective for us in kind of around that core facilities. But that issue of instrumentation, making sure you've got top-notch instrumentation is a real significant issue. And there should be enough central resources at the university to match. You have to match those MRIs. You can't not go after the MRIs. You have to have that top-notch instrumentation, or your faculty they're going to be going somewhere else if that happens. So you got to figure that out. Penn State has it figured out. I was there a while ago. You want to see some investment in core facilities? It's really impressive. So it's a critical thing.
Thank you. I do have a question from online. Ed Tackett asks, what do you see the largest barriers to developing an innovative ecosystem at the University of Louisville?
So first, let me say that the innovation ecosystem in Kentucky is great. So you guys have a lot to work with at the state. Your state is investing in this. University of Kentucky, since I spoke to the director of their tech transfer operations about this position, is all on board in partnering. University of Louisville's on a bunch of grants that they've headed up. So there's a lot of opportunity in the state. There's a lot in the state. And so it's hard for me to say, what is it about Louisville, except to say that culture is hard to change. And I think, and this is true at New Hampshire also, the culture of entrepreneurship, the culture of innovation, the culture of thinking about the value of your ideas in the broader world is a hard thing to change. One approach I've been working on, I can't say, well, this will hit the ball out of the park if you do this, but is to build those relationships between industry and university, or whatever community partners. Because then I think faculty can recognize the value of their work and the value of their ideas from the perspective of the industry. And I would say that we shouldn't think about, I meant to preface this before by saying that big companies are going to top maybe five or 10 partners globally, that they're not going to work with lots of people. And so Louisville has to think about who are our big partners. But a more important question is, for whom are we the best partner? What companies are we the best partner for, where they hire our workforce, where they engage with us in research? So I think through engagement with business, industry, with community, with state services, with all those types of outside entities, we can understand the value of the ideas that we have and promote a more entrepreneurial spirit. We also celebrate entrepreneurship and innovation. I know you guys had your first celebration of that. I think it was your first celebration of that recently, celebrating those individuals for the work that they've done. I think that's really important. I think at New Hampshire, we didn't celebrate research enough until we actually have a laundry list of teaching awards about as long as my arm and one research award. That's what we had at New Hampshire. And we started celebrating research much more broadly, research, scholarship, and creative activity much more broadly. So I think celebration, speaking about it, like valuing it, expressing that value, and celebrating it is important. I'll also say when I was in Singapore, NTU, we asked the question, sometimes people are really all about fundamental research, which is fine, and not so much about maybe more applied work or translational work or work that has more ready value in society. And we asked their perspective at NTU about, well, what if a person does a startup, or what if they're engaged with a company or get funded by a company? And their response was, if they engage with a company, if they're really truly engaged with a company in some fashion, guaranteed tenure. Like they're going to get tenure. So that's a different culture. Like that's a very different culture. But
Thank you.
I was just at the APLU conference. I was just telling this to somebody, to Beth, I think, this morning. And Freeman Hrabowski is president of UMBC. He's great president, really inspirational. Just said, Trumper. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast or something like that. So you really have to think about the culture of a place and why it is that, what is it about entrepreneurship or innovation that maybe could be better than it is now, and how do we then respect that and move from that place? Armand? Hi.
Hey, Armand Perry, School of Social Work. Thanks for coming to visit with us. My question has to do with these ideas around culture and valuing research that you alluded to. One of the things that many of the folks who apply for this position have told us is that they have really, really good ideas for, again, as you mentioned, core facilities and laboratories and something called tech transfer and so on, whatever that stuff is. Seems really, really interesting. For folks like myself in the social and behavioral sciences, many of us are curious to know, what thoughts and ideas do you have about moving the needle in regard to the work that we do? And in answering that, I'd like for you to keep in mind that when we've asked this question before, oftentimes what we've gotten is tantamount to, well, what we'll do is we'll invite you to the engineering or the health sciences party.
Yeah.
And when you talk about changing the culture and value, those things don't signal, to me anyway, a changing of culture or valuing independently the research that folks in the human and social sciences do.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that. I will say that actually earlier, I think you weren't here yet, but I was talking about my experience in a transdisciplinary research background. But that also doesn't get to your question, because that was kind of the ways in which humanists and others can contribute to this larger kind of project. But I think it's really important to state and to recognize that all forms of scholarship and creative activity have value, and it's not just the ways that a humanist contributes to healthcare or something like that has value. So I think it's really important to state that and to recognize that. I think moving the needle, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. Do you mean in terms of funding levels, or do you mean in terms of scholarship levels, or do you have something in mind about?
Sure. I'm thinking about the culture change that values that type of research in a tangible way.
Yeah. So absolutely. I think that the role, coming from social work, I think that there's. Let me tell you about something we've done at the University of New Hampshire. A couple things. So one is that all forms of research need to be celebrated, and we put together a celebration of research that where people that were recognized by outside entities would tell us how they were recognized, and then we'd pull all that stuff together. So it was very democratic. So people who won a book award, or people who were invited to give a talk, in Sweden, or it's really varied all across the board. And it's amazing. It's amazing how much there is, and it's also amazing that people feel like they don't get recognized for that work. And so we pulled together a celebration of that work, and we do that on an annual basis now. So I think that those types of things are important. The other thing that we've done is, I'll tell you two other things. One is engage purposefully with state agencies. We haven't always had the best relationship with our state, but we engage with the state in all these different ways that we don't even know about as a university. I mean, without really, we really don't know. We don't know how we engage with Department of Health and Human Services, with Department of Environmental Services, Transportation, so forth, all those state agencies. And it turns out we do it in a lot of ways, and we could do it in more ways. So that's another way that we try to engage some external partners in a really intentional way so that the heads of those departments, the commissioners of those departments know, oh, the university is engaged in all these different ways. And then the last thing is that we're really trying to collect information on the ways that we engage with the broader public. So art exhibits, performances, all those types of things, readings, poetry slams, I don't even know. Anything that people are doing like that, we want to know about. It's just hard to get that information together. But I think it's really important to tell our story. I mean, I would say that I would go on a limb and shoot myself in the foot and say, like, I bet humanities and arts impacts culture more in this place than, or impacts society more in many cases than does science and engineering. So it's really important for the impact that this university has on this metropolitan region to recognize that and to value that and to celebrate that.
I have a question while you're going to the microphone. I have a question from Dr. Bill Pierce online. Could you address the largest challenges to maintaining R1 status?
That's a great question. I mean, there's two components. I actually have the whole breakdown, and I forgot where you're not that far down. Compared to New Hampshire, you guys are in a much better place. So New Hampshire is the skin of our teeth, and we're by the skin of our teeth because of our doctoral research production. So our research intensity would put us way up the rankings, so kind of research per tenure-track faculty member. But our PhD production is really, really low, way below where we are in the rankings. So kind of when you even those things out. So we're really imbalanced. I think that Louisville's more balanced than that, and so I think the strategy is to focus on both of those things. It's the research intensity per faculty member, and it's also the graduate production rates. And it's not just graduate production in STEM fields, right? It's research-based PhDs in broadly, and humanities is included in there, right? Social science is included in there, so it includes all of those, and they're kind of weighted differently. But so it's really important to pay attention to those. You know, in my world, research and grad education are just like this. They have to be just like this. In many fields, that's the workforce for the research engine. Other fields, it's not. But we have to, and we have to recognize that humanities, for example, it's not. It's time away. Many times, it's a scholar's time away from their work to mentor a PhD student. So we have to recognize that and value that and know that it's different in the humanities than it is in the engineering and sciences. So anyway, those are the two components. It's really important. I have a statistical breakdown of those, what goes into those R1, and it's important that we pay attention to those and and improve our positioning in that R1 for sure.
Thank you.
You talked about the university being involved in startups. I was wondering what kind of models you've seen successfully implemented into a university, and also how do you handle conflict of interest?
So there are, I would say at New Hampshire, we don't have, I think for a model, I would look at Kentucky. I would look at I don't know if it's been proved out, but they put a team together now where it's really a team devoted to the startup creation. In fact, last week they had founder hunt in your town at Churchill Downs, I think. So there was a pitch for CEOs and founders and things like that. So it was it was health tech focused, bringing their ideas forward. So, you know, what it takes is a team of people who can connect the inventor with the right kind of resources, but it's never I shouldn't say never, but it's rarely the inventor who is, you know, the CEO or moving that technology forward, because private investors will never go for that faculty member. And that also gets around that conflict of interest or conflict of commitment between those two. How we deal with conflict of interest. So we have a policy that says that we have a liberal policy that says that you can be CEO or CFO of your startup for 2 years, for a 2-year period, and then after that 2-year period, you can be you can have a position like head of technology or something like that, right? A scientific director or something like that, or there's a better term for that. But you can't have fiduciary responsibility for that startup. So that's a tricky space. A lot of universities say, like Stanford says, no, you can't, or even Dartmouth, they give them generous leave policies to go start their business, but you can't serve as a CEO of a business and faculty member. It's a clear conflict of commitment and financial conflict of interest. So we struggle with that a little bit at New Hampshire. We just put that conflict of interest policy around startup creation into effect, and it was a struggle to get that into place. So it's not easy.
Thank you. I have another question for Mr. Ed Tackett. How would you approach a company, considering you have already expressed your interest in institutional shift, core facilities, to convincing the company to shift their risk to close the gap through the valley of death to bring truly transformative projects to U of L?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, I'm trying to make it into a question. So how would you approach a company to convince that company to shift their risk to close the gap through the valley of death to bring truly transformative projects to U of L? Ed, am I saying that appropriately?
It's like a trick question. No, I will say, okay, so the Valley of Death is a real thing, and I feel like Kentucky has positioned itself to more effectively meet that issue. So I'll tell you an experience from New Hampshire where we heard I actually heard by accident that this company had called the director of our innovation office and asked, is there any matching funds for SBIR awards? And he said, no, click, hung up the phone. And then I heard about this and I said, wait, who was this person and what did they want? And I called him up, and it turns out he had a phase 2 SBIR plussed up by Department of Defense. So it was a $2 million SBIR for this technology related to drones, and the Air Force was really interested in it. And the state of Massachusetts, he's in Exeter, New Hampshire, it's right by the border of Massachusetts, which is a giant startup culture, and Cambridge, Boston, everything. They had a $250,000 check ready for him. They said, just move down to New Hampshire. We'll give you free space at this university. We'll give you matching money for your SBIR. And his problem was he had deliverables associated with this SBIR phase 2 that were due in 6 months or something like that. But he had to hire a workforce to get to that deliverable stage. And after he gets the deliverables, then he gets paid. So he basically had a 6-month cash flow problem. And the state of New Hampshire had no ability to deal with that. So I actually took that story to the legislature, to the Bureau of Economic Affairs, and despite all this work we've done over many years to say, we need a better startup culture. New Hampshire, look at these statistics. New Hampshire's not as good as other states that are comparable to us. We need to work on this as a state-university partnership. We were talking about all these statistics, but one story, one person, one inventor coming before them and telling them his story and why this cash flow didn't work was enough to really change the needle. And all of a sudden now we have bills in the legislature, we have Community Development Finance Authority that's ready to underwrite those loans. We have a solution. So in this case, we're working on putting a risk pool together so that lenders can make those loans that don't have any collateral, and then the risk pool takes care of that issue. So they don't have to sign up for a 38% interest rate loan to get a loan for 6 months or something like that. So I think it takes that kind of state partnership. That's a really important piece of it. But I think Louisville should be in that conversation with the state, with its own startup activities, and with its partners, because a lot of times it's really valuable for those types of companies he's talking about to locate right here, because they can hire interns. There's expertise from the faculty, right? There's instrumentation. There's all those types of things.
Thank you. We appreciate you being with us today. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you.